shopping mall was always loud in the evenings. People walked quickly from store to store, holding bright bags filled with new clothes and shoes. Children laughed near the toy shop. Music from different stores mixed together in the air. In the center of the mall, under a tall glass ceiling, there was a large black piano. It was placed there for anyone who wanted to sit and play. Some people played simple tunes. Some only touched the keys for a few seconds and laughed. Most people just passed by without paying much attention. Near one of the wide entrances, a thin boy stood quietly almost every day. His clothes were old and a little too big for him. His shoes were worn out at the front. His hair was not messy, but it looked like it had not been cut in a long time. He carried a small backpack that looked flat and light, as if it did not hold much. He never asked anyone for money. He never bothered anyone. He simply stood near a pillar watching. Most people did not notice him. Some thought he was waiting for someone. Some assumed he was just another street child wandering inside to stay warm. Security guards had seen him many times, but since he did not cause trouble, they let him stay for a while before asking him to leave at night. But there was one thing about him that was different. Every time someone sat at the piano, the boy moved a little closer. He never rushed. He never pushed through the crowd. He just stepped quietly to a place where he could see the keys clearly. His eyes would focus on the player's hands. Sometimes his fingers moved slightly in the air, as if he was playing invisible keys. When the music was soft, his head tilted gently. When it was fast, his eyes followed each movement carefully. One evening, a young man sat at the piano and began playing a popular song. It was not perfect, but it was cheerful. A small crowd gathered. Some people recorded short videos. Others clapped at the end. The boy stood near the back. When the song finished, the crowd slowly disappeared. The young man stood up, laughing proudly. He looked around and saw the boy standing close to the piano now. "You want to try?" the young man asked in a joking tone. A few people nearby turned their heads. Some smiled. They thought it would be funny to see what the boy would do. After all, he looked like someone who had never even touched a piano before. The boy did not answer right away. He looked at the piano. Then he looked at the young man. His hands tightened around the straps of his backpack. For a moment, it seemed like he might shake his head and walk away. But he did not. He slowly stepped forward. The young man laughed lightly and moved aside. "Go on. Just for fun," he said. Two teenage girls standing nearby covered their mouths, trying not to giggle. A middle-aged woman folded her arms and watched with a doubtful look. A small child pulled at his mother's sleeve and pointed at the boy. The boy stood in front of the piano bench. He looked smaller up close. The bright lights from above reflected on the shiny black surface of the instrument. For a second, he seemed frozen. Inside him, something was moving. He had seen pianos before this one. Not in places like this. Not shiny and polished. The piano he remembered was old. Its paint was chipped. Some keys were slightly yellow. It stood in the corner of a small building where the roof sometimes leaked when it rained. He remembered sitting beside someone who used to guide his fingers gently over the keys. He remembered being told to listen first. "Feel the sound," a soft voice once said. "Don't just press. Listen." That memory felt both warm and painful. Back in the mall, someone whispered, "He probably doesn't even know how to sit properly." Another person said, "This should be interesting." The boy heard the whispers. He was used to whispers. People often spoke about him as if he could not hear. He slowly placed his backpack on the floor. Then he sat down on the piano bench. His feet barely touched the ground. For a moment he did nothing. He looked at the keys carefully, almost as if greeting them. His fingers hovered above them but did not press. A security guard began walking toward the piano, watching closely. He was not sure if this would become a problem. The boy closed his eyes. The mall noise seemed louder for a second. Footsteps, voices, distant laughter. But in his mind, the noise began to fade. He imagined the old room again. The quiet space. The simple wooden chair. The patient voice guiding him. He opened his eyes. Very gently he placed both hands on the keys. But he still did not press. A few people lost interest and started walking away. "He's scared," someone said. The young man who had offered him the seat crossed his arms, waiting. He was smiling, but now there was a little curiosity in his eyes. The boy took a slow breath. He was not thinking about the people anymore. He was not thinking about their clothes, their phones, or their faces. He was thinking about the sound he wanted to hear. The first note had to be right. He pressed one key softly. The sound was clear and gentle. It was not loud. It was not messy. It was controlled. The boy listened carefully as the note faded into the air. Then he pressed another, and another. The sounds were simple, but they were placed with care, as if each one mattered. The teenage girls stopped whispering. The security guard paused where he was. The young man lowered his smile slightly. The boy's fingers began to move slowly across the keys. Not randomly, not nervously, with purpose. The music was still soft, almost fragile. It felt like a story beginning quietly, asking people to lean closer if they truly wanted to hear it. A woman who had been walking past slowed down. A child stopped tugging at his mother's sleeve. The boy's back straightened slightly. His fingers moved more confidently now. The melody started to grow. It was not a song people recognized from the radio. It was something deeper, something older. There was sadness in it, but there was also hope. It felt like a voice that had been silent for a long time and was finally allowed to speak. The mall did not become completely silent, but something shifted. People who were walking by began to turn their heads. Conversations softened. A few more people stepped closer. The boy was no longer aware of them. His hands moved with surprising skill for someone who looked like he had spent most of his time on the streets. His fingers curved properly. His wrists lifted slightly at the right moments. His timing was steady. He was not just pressing keys. He was telling something. The young man who had offered him the seat slowly uncrossed his arms. His expression changed from amusement to confusion. The security guard stopped walking and simply stood there, listening. The melody grew stronger. The soft beginning turned into something fuller. The notes flowed smoothly, one into another, like water moving around stones in a quiet river. A man in a business suit who had been checking his phone lowered it slowly. His eyes fixed on the boy's hands. No one was laughing now. The boy's face remained calm, but there was a deep focus in his eyes. It was as if this piano was the only thing that existed in that moment. The bright lights, the crowd, the whispers. All of it disappeared from his world. He was no longer the destitute boy standing near the entrance. He was a musician, and this was only the beginning. The music continued to rise gently, like the start of something important. People felt it without fully understanding why. Some felt a strange tightness in their chest. Others felt their thoughts slow down. It had started as a joke. It was no longer funny. It was becoming something no one expected. The soft melody continued to float through the air, and more people slowly gathered around the piano. What had started as light laughter had now turned into quiet attention. The boy's fingers moved with care, and every note sounded clean and clear. He was not rushing. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was simply playing as if the piano had been waiting for him. But not everyone believed what they were hearing. A tall man standing near the back leaned toward his friend and whispered, "Maybe he memorized one small piece. Let's see how long he can keep this up." A woman folded her arms and said quietly, "It must be luck. Anyone can press a few keys and make it sound decent." The words were not loud, but they were not kind either. The boy could not hear every sentence clearly, but he could feel the doubt in the air. He had felt that kind of doubt before. It followed him in many places. People often looked at his clothes first and decided who he was without knowing anything else. Still, his hands did not shake. Instead, the music began to change. The soft opening turned into something deeper. His left hand carried a steady rhythm while his right hand moved lightly across the higher keys. The sound grew richer. It was no longer just gentle notes. It had shape and direction. A child sitting on the floor near the front stared at him with wide eyes. The child did not see old clothes or worn shoes. The child only saw someone creating something beautiful. The young man who had first offered him the seat shifted his weight from one foot to another. His smile had completely disappeared now. He was listening carefully, almost studying the boy's hands. "How does he know how to do that?" someone murmured. The boy leaned slightly forward as he played. His face remained calm, but inside him, emotions were moving like waves. Each note felt like a memory. Each chord felt like something he had carried in his heart for a long time. He remembered cold nights when he had no place to go. He remembered sitting outside a small building just to hear music coming from inside. Sometimes he would close his eyes and imagine that he was the one playing. Music had always been the one thing that made him feel safe. The melody now grew stronger. It was no longer shy. It filled the open space under the glass ceiling. Even the sound from nearby stores seemed to fade into the background. A group of teenagers who had been laughing loudly earlier stopped talking. One of them slowly took out a phone and began recording. The boy did not notice. His fingers moved faster now, but not in a wild way. They moved with control and confidence. The rhythm remained steady, like a heartbeat. His shoulders relaxed as if he had forgotten where he was. Some people began stepping closer. The small circle around the piano grew larger. A worker from a nearby cafe leaned over the counter to see what was happening. Even the security guard, who had first approached with caution, now stood quietly with his hands behind his back. The tall man who had doubted him earlier shook his head slowly. "That's not luck," he admitted under his breath. The music suddenly softened again. It dropped into a quiet, emotional passage. The notes felt almost fragile, like something that could break if touched too roughly. A woman near the front wiped her eye quickly, surprised by her own reaction. The boy's expression changed slightly. His eyebrows lowered, and his lips pressed together gently. He was not thinking about the crowd. He was thinking about someone he had lost. He was thinking about a voice that once encouraged him to practice even when his fingers hurt. He had learned to play not from expensive lessons but from careful listening. He had watched others. He had practiced in empty places whenever he found a piano. Sometimes he practiced on broken keyboards where some notes did not work. Sometimes he practiced only on a table pressing imaginary keys. But he never stopped. Back in the present moment, his right hand climbed higher on the keyboard, creating a bright and clear sound that echoed beautifully in the open space. The contrast between the low steady notes and the light higher melody made the music feel alive. People were no longer whispering. They were listening. A man in a suit stepped forward until he stood only a few feet away. His serious expression softened. A small smile appeared on his face, not out of amusement but respect. The boy's playing became more powerful. It was not loud in a noisy way. It was strong in feeling. The kind of music that makes people pause and reflect without knowing exactly why. The young man who had joked earlier now felt slightly embarrassed. He had not expected this. He had thought it would be a short, awkward moment. Instead, he was witnessing something rare. A small child clapped once by accident during a pause, then quickly covered their mouth. The crowd did not laugh. They simply waited for the next note. And it came. Clear. Confident. Beautiful. The boy shifted slightly on the bench. His feet still barely touched the ground, but his posture showed experience. His wrists lifted smoothly as he moved between phrases. There was training in his touch even if no one knew where it had come from. The music began building toward something bigger. It was as if he was telling his story without using words. The beginning had been quiet, like a lonely walk. The middle carried struggle and pain. But now something else was rising, strength. A woman near the back whispered, "He's not just playing. He feels it." The cafe worker slowly stepped away from the counter, leaving another worker to manage customers. More phones were now raised in the air, recording quietly. The security guard glanced around, not to stop anything, but to make sure no one disturbed the moment. The boys' hands crossed briefly over each other in a smooth motion. A soft sound came from the crowd. Not laughter, not doubt, but surprise. The tall man who had doubted him earlier now stood with his arms relaxed at his sides. His earlier confidence had disappeared. The music slowed again, moving into a delicate section. Each note was spaced carefully, like careful footsteps on thin ice. The silence between the notes felt just as important as the sound. No one moved. The mall, usually full of noise and hurry, now felt like a quiet hall. The boy's breathing remained steady. His eyes stayed focused on the keys. There was no sign of fear anymore, only concentration. Then, slowly, the melody began to rise again. But this time it carried something different. Hope. The notes felt warmer, brighter. They carried a quiet message that even after loss and hardship, something beautiful could still grow. People felt it. A woman pressed her hand gently against her chest. A man blinked several times, trying to understand why his eyes suddenly felt wet. The young man who had offered the piano seat looked down at the boy with new respect. He no longer saw a destitute child standing near the entrance. He saw a true musician sitting at the piano. The final notes of this section rang out clearly and gently faded into the open air. But the boy did not stop. He paused only for a second, as if preparing to take everyone even deeper into his world. The crowd waited. No one whispered now. No one doubted. What had started as curiosity had turned into quiet admiration. And as his fingers prepared to move again, everyone understood something simple but powerful. They had judged him too quickly, and the music was far from over. The pause after the last note felt long, even though it was only a few seconds. The boy kept his fingers resting lightly on the keys. The crowd stood still, waiting. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. It felt like something important was about to happen. Then he began again. This time, the sound was different from before. It was stronger, fuller, and more confident. The soft sadness from earlier was still there, but now it carried courage. The melody rose gently, like sunlight slowly breaking through clouds after a long storm. His left hand moved with steady rhythm, giving the music a solid bass. His right hand danced over the higher keys with ease. The notes flowed smoothly, not rushed, not forced. Each phrase felt complete, like a sentence spoken clearly and honestly. People leaned closer without realizing it. A woman who had been standing near the back slowly stepped forward. A man who had been checking messages on his phone slid it quietly into his pocket. The cafe worker who had left the counter earlier folded their arms and simply listened. The boy's expression changed again. His eyes were no longer just focused. They were alive. There was something bright in them now, something that had been hidden behind silence for a long time. He pressed a series of quick notes that moved like running water. The sound echoed beautifully under the tall glass ceiling. The space that once felt noisy now felt like a concert hall. A small child sitting cross-legged on the floor began swaying gently to the rhythm. The child's mother placed a hand softly on the child's shoulder but did not stop them. Even she was caught in the music. The young man who had first invited him to play felt a mix of surprise and respect. He looked around at the growing crowd and realized this was no longer a simple mall moment. This was something rare. The boy's hands crossed over each other again, this time more smoothly. His fingers moved quickly but carefully, never hitting the wrong note. His shoulders stayed relaxed. His breathing was steady. He was not trying to prove anything. He was simply being himself. The melody shifted into a brighter section. Felt hopeful, almost joyful. It was as if he was sharing a memory of a happy day from long ago. A day when things were simple. A day when he did not have to worry about where he would sleep. The crowd could feel the change. A man standing near the front smiled gently. A woman closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over her. The tall man who had doubted him earlier shook his head slowly, amazed at how wrong he had been. More people gathered. Some stood on the second-floor balcony above, looking down at the piano. A few workers from nearby stores stepped outside their shops to see what was happening. The boy did not look up once. He was fully inside the music. His fingers moved in patterns that showed training, even if no one knew where that training had come from. His timing was perfect. His touch on the keys was soft when needed and strong when the moment called for it. The melody began building towards something powerful. It grew louder, not in a harsh way, but in a confident way. The sound filled the entire space. It reached the corners of the mall and seemed to settle gently into every heart listening. A woman near the front pressed her lips together, holding back tears. She did not know why the music touched her so deeply, but it did. The boy leaned slightly forward as he played a strong sequence of chords. The sound felt like a voice finally speaking after being silent for too long. Felt honest and real. The security guard who had once approached carefully now stood with a soft expression. He had seen many things in that mall, laughter, arguments, celebrations, but nothing like this. The music suddenly softened again. It dropped into a quiet, emotional passage. The notes felt fragile but steady. Each one seemed to carry a story. The crowd held their breath. In that gentle section, the boy's face showed something deeper. His eyebrows lowered slightly. His lips tightened just a little. It was as if he was remembering something important. Maybe a small room with an old piano. Maybe a kind voice guiding his hands. Maybe nights when music was the only thing that made him feel less alone. No one knew his full story, but everyone could feel pieces of it in the music. A soft sniffle came from somewhere in the crowd. The boy continued, unaware of the tears forming around him. He was not playing for attention. He was not playing for money. He was playing because this was the one place where he felt completely understood. The melody began to rise once more. This time it carried strength and hope together. The left hand moved with strong, steady chords. The right hand lifted the melody higher and higher, like a bird learning to fly. The sound became powerful and emotional. A man in a suit wiped his eye quickly and looked around, embarrassed. But he was not alone. Several others were blinking back tears. The young man who had joked earlier now felt something heavy in his chest. He had almost laughed. He had almost treated this moment like a joke. Instead, he was witnessing something beautiful. The boy's hands moved faster now, but still with control. The notes flowed smoothly. The rhythm remained steady. There was no fear left in his movements. Only confidence. People began recording more seriously now. Not for humor. Not for a quick social media clip. But because they felt this was something worth remembering. The melody reached a high point. It was bold and bright, full of life. It felt like standing on a hill after a long climb and finally seeing the sunrise. Felt like relief. Then, slowly, gently, the music began to calm. The powerful chords softened. The fast notes slowed. The sound became quiet again, like a peaceful ending to a long story. The boy's fingers moved carefully, pressing the final phrases with tenderness. He let each note ring fully before moving to the next. The entire mall felt still. Even the background noise seemed to fade. The last few notes were simple and pure. They did not try to impress. They simply existed. Then came the final note. It rang clearly and slowly faded into silence. The boy kept his hands on the keys for a second longer, as if saying goodbye to the music. Then he gently lifted them. Silence. No one moved. For one brief moment, the entire crowd stood frozen, almost afraid to break what they had just experienced. Then someone began clapping. The sound was soft at first. Then another joined. And another. Within seconds, the entire space filled with applause. It was not polite clapping. It was strong, honest, emotional. Some people clapped while wiping tears. Others smiled through wet eyes. A few shook their heads in disbelief. The boy looked up for the first time. He blinked, surprised by the reaction. His eyes moved across the crowd, seeing faces that were no longer doubtful or amused. They were grateful. He slowly stood up from the bench. He looked smaller again now that the music had stopped. Just a thin boy in worn clothes standing in the middle of a bright mall. But something had changed. People were no longer seeing his clothes first. They were seeing his gift. The young man stepped forward, clapping harder than anyone else. The security guard nodded respectfully. The tall man who had doubted him earlier clapped with genuine admiration. The applause continued. And in that moment, the boy realized something simple but powerful. For the first time in a long while, people were not looking at him with pity. They were looking at him with respect. And this was only the beginning of something none of them would forget. The applause did not stop quickly. It rolled through the mall like a wave. People who had never met the boy were clapping as if they had known him for years. Some were smiling through tears. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. The boy stood beside the piano, unsure of what to do next. He was not used to this kind of attention. Most days, people avoided eye contact with him. They walked past him without slowing down. Now, dozens of eyes were fixed on him, not with doubt or judgment, but with respect. He picked up his small backpack from the floor and held it close to his chest. His fingers were still slightly warm from the keys. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. Her voice was gentle. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked. The question hung in the air. Others leaned in, curious. A man in a suit asked softly, "Do you take lessons somewhere?" The boy looked down at the piano keys instead of answering right away. His eyes moved over them slowly, as if the instrument itself held the memories. "I used to practice," he said quietly. His voice was soft but clear. "Where?" someone asked again. He hesitated. The mall felt different now. It was no longer just a busy building with shops. Felt like a place waiting for his story. "There was an old piano," he began, "in a small community center near where I used to live." His words were simple. He did not speak dramatically. He just spoke honestly. "It was not new," he continued. "Some keys were loose. A few did not sound right. But it still worked." The crowd listened closely. "My mother cleaned there sometimes," he said. "When she worked late, I waited for her. That's when I started touching the keys." His eyes softened as he spoke. "At first, I only pressed them to hear the sound. Then someone showed me how to sit properly, how to move my hands slowly." "Who?" the woman asked gently. He swallowed. "An older man who came there in the evenings. He said music should be felt, not rushed." He paused for a moment, remembering. "He didn't stay long," the boy added quietly. "But he taught me enough to understand." The crowd was silent. "And after that?" the man in the suit asked. The boy's fingers tightened slightly around the straps of his backpack. "After that, things changed." He did not go into detail. He did not speak about the long nights or the empty rooms. He did not explain how quickly life can shift without warning. He only said, "We lost our home, and the piano stayed behind." A soft sigh moved through the listeners. "For a while I didn't play," he admitted. "There was no piano, and we had other things to worry about." His voice remained steady, but there was a quiet weight in it. "But whenever I found one," he continued, glancing at the mall piano, "I tried to remember what I learned. I watched people. I listened carefully. I practiced in my head." "In your head?" a teenager repeated softly. He nodded. "Sometimes I would sit somewhere quiet and imagine the keys in front of me. I would move my fingers on a table and pretend it was real." A few people exchanged looks. They could picture it now. A boy practicing on a wooden surface, hearing music that only he could hear. The cafe worker stepped closer. "So you never had regular lessons?" they asked. He shook his head. "No," he said simply. "Just practice. And listening." The young man who had first invited him to play felt a deep sense of respect. He had grown up with access to music classes, teachers, and instruments. And yet, this boy had created something just as powerful with almost nothing. A small child tugged at the boy's sleeve. "Can you teach me?" the child asked innocently. A gentle smile appeared on the boy's face. "I'm still learning," he replied. The crowd laughed softly, not in mockery, but in warmth. The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Do you play anywhere else?" he asked. The boy shook his head again. "Only when I find a piano." "And where do you stay?" the woman asked carefully. He hesitated again, not wanting to make anyone uncomfortable. "I move around," he answered. "Sometimes here, sometimes near the station." He did not ask for help. He did not complain. He simply stated it as fact. The security guard, who had once watched him with suspicion, now felt something different. Concern mixed with admiration. The mall no longer felt like a random place where something surprising had happened. Felt like a turning point. A teenage girl stepped forward. "You should be playing on a big stage," she said honestly. The boy looked confused. "This is fine," he replied softly. He meant it. For him, the piano itself was enough. But the people around him were thinking differently now. The woman who had first asked him questions turned to the others. "We can't just let this end here," she said quietly. The young man nodded. "He deserves more than just one performance." Someone in the back said, "We should record him properly next time." Another added, "There must be someone who can help him." The boy listened but did not interrupt. He was not used to people speaking about him in hopeful ways. The man in the suit looked thoughtful. "There's a music academy not far from here," he said slowly. "They sometimes offer scholarships." The word scholarship sounded unfamiliar in this setting, but it carried weight. The boy shifted his feet slightly. "I don't need anything," he said gently. "I was just playing." His words were honest. He had not sat down at the piano expecting anything. But the crowd had felt something special. And they were not ready to walk away as if it had been just another evening. The cafe worker reached into their pocket and placed a small amount of money on top of the piano. "For bus fare," they said quietly. The boy looked at it, surprised. "You don't have to," he said quickly. "It's not charity," the worker replied. "It's respect." Others followed. Not large amounts, just small, thoughtful gestures. Each one placed gently on the piano, not thrown or waved. The boy's eyes widened slightly. He had experienced pity before, but this felt different. This felt like belief. The security guard spoke up. "You're welcome to play here again," he said. "As long as you want." The boy looked at him, surprised. "Really?" he asked. The guard nodded. The crowd began slowly thinning as people returned to their shopping, but something had changed. They did not walk away the same way they had arrived. They left talking about him. They left thinking about how quickly they had judged him. They left wondering how many other quiet talents might be standing unnoticed in busy places. The boy carefully picked up the small pile of money and placed it inside his backpack. Not greedily, not quickly, carefully. He turned back to the piano once more and ran his fingers lightly across the keys, not playing a full note, just touching them gently, as if promising to return. Before leaving, he looked around at the faces still watching him. "Thank you," he said simply, and for the first time in a long time he did not feel invisible. He walked toward the exit slowly, his steps steady. Behind him, the piano remained in the center of the mall, shining under the bright lights. But now it was no longer just a decoration or a source of background noise. It had become the place where people learned something important. Talent does not always arrive dressed in fine clothes. And sometimes the most powerful stories begin with someone brave enough to sit down and play. The next evening, the mall felt different, even before anything happened. Word had spread. Some people had posted short clips of the boy playing the piano. The videos were simple, taken on phones, a little shaky, filled with background noise. But the music was clear enough. The emotion was clear enough. By the next day, thousands of people had watched. Comments filled the screen. "Who is he? This gave me chills. Please find this boy. He deserves a chance." Inside the mall, workers whispered about it. The cafe staff kept glancing toward the piano. The security guard who had spoken kindly to the boy stood a little straighter that day. And then, just as the evening crowd began to grow, he appeared. He walked in the same way as before, quietly carrying his small backpack. But this time, a few people recognized him immediately. "That's him," someone whispered. The boy noticed the looks but kept walking calmly. He did not seem proud or nervous. He simply looked toward the piano. The security guard gave him a small nod. "It's free," he said gently. The boy nodded back. A small crowd had already started forming before he even reached the bench. Some people had come just to see him play again. A few held their phones ready, but they were careful not to push forward or crowd him too closely. He placed his backpack down beside the bench like he had done the day before. For a moment, he looked at the piano in silence. He had thought about this moment all day. Not about fame, not about attention, but about the chance to play again without being rushed away. He sat down slowly. The mall noise was still there. Footsteps, laughter, distant music from stores, but something about the atmosphere felt softer. He placed his fingers on the keys. This time he did not hesitate. The first note came out clear and strong. The crowd fell quiet almost immediately. He began with a melody that felt warm and welcoming. It was different from the previous day. Less sadness, more light. His hands moved with even more confidence now. There was no trace of doubt left in him. He was no longer the boy people laughed at. He was the boy people came to hear. As the music flowed, more people gathered. Some stood on the upper floor balcony again. Others sat on the nearby steps. A few elderly people leaned on the railing, watching with gentle smiles. The cafe worker who had first placed money on the piano stood near the front, eyes shining with pride. The melody grew brighter. There was joy in it now. Real joy. It felt like the sound of someone who had discovered that he was not alone anymore. Halfway through the piece, a man stepped through the crowd quietly. He did not push or interrupt. He simply listened carefully, his eyes focused on the boy's hands. He was not dressed in flashy clothes. He carried a simple folder under his arm. But there was something attentive about him, something thoughtful. He stayed until the music reached its highest point. The boy played with strength and clarity. His fingers moved quickly, but each note was clean. The rhythm was steady. His body swayed slightly with the music, completely natural. When the final notes rang out, the applause came faster than the day before. It was louder, stronger. People clapped with excitement, not just emotion. The boy stood up again, blinking at the crowd. Before he could step away, the man with the folder approached him. "You play beautifully," the man said calmly. The boy nodded politely. "Thank you. Have you ever studied music formally?" the man asked. The boy shook his head. "No." The man opened his folder and pulled out a card. "I work with a small music academy not far from here," he explained. "We saw the video yesterday." The crowd leaned closer, trying to hear. "We've been looking for young talent," the man continued. "But talent like this is rare." The boy looked confused, almost unsure if the words were meant for him. "I would like you to come and meet our teachers," the man said. "No cost. Just a meeting." The boy held the card carefully, as if it might disappear. "I don't have money," he said honestly. The man smiled gently. "That's not what I'm asking for." The cafe worker stepped forward. "He deserves this," they said firmly. Others nodded. The security guard crossed his arms with a small proud smile. The boy looked around at the faces watching him. None of them looked doubtful now. None of them were whispering in mockery. They were hopeful. The man continued, "If you're willing, we can arrange lessons, a place to practice, even support for school." The word school made the boy's expression change slightly. He had missed many days. Life had been unpredictable. Music had been his teacher more than anything else. "You really mean it?" he asked softly. "Yes," the man replied, "but only if you want it." The boy looked down at the piano keys. He thought about the old broken piano from his past. He thought about practicing on tables and imagining sounds. He thought about playing in empty spaces with no one listening. And now people were offering him a real chance. "I want to learn," he said quietly. The crowd erupted into applause again, even though no music was playing. Some people wiped tears. Others laughed in happiness. The man handed him the card and wrote a number on the back. "Come tomorrow afternoon," he said. "We'll be waiting." The boy held the card tightly. For the first time in a long while, his future did not feel like a question without an answer. As the crowd slowly began to settle, someone called out, "Play one more." Others joined in. "One more." The boy hesitated, then smiled shyly. He sat down again. This time, the music he played was lighter, almost playful. It danced across the keys with freedom. There was excitement in it, like a new chapter opening. People clapped along softly with the rhythm. A child twirled in a small circle near the front. Even the serious man in the suit from the day before laughed gently as he tapped his foot. When the final note ended, the applause felt like a celebration, not just of his music, but of possibility. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the boy packed his backpack carefully. The cafe worker pressed a small wrapped sandwich into his hand. "For later," they said kindly. "Thank you," he replied. The security guard walked him to the entrance. "You earned this," he said quietly. The boy looked back at the piano one more time. It had been just an instrument in a mall. Now it felt like the doorway to something bigger. He stepped outside into the evening air, the card still in his hand. The city lights glowed around him, but for the first time, they did not feel distant or cold. They felt reachable. And as he walked down the street, he held onto one simple thought. Sometimes all it takes is one chance, one moment, one person willing to listen, and everything can change. The next afternoon, the boy stood outside the small music academy, holding the card tightly in his hand. The building was not as large as the mall, but to him it felt even bigger. The glass doors were clean and bright. Through them, he could see a hallway with framed pictures on the walls. Students holding certificates, small groups standing beside pianos, smiling proudly. He looked down at his clothes for a moment. They were the same as always, clean but worn. He brushed his sleeves nervously and took a slow breath. Then he pushed the door open. A soft bell rang above him as he stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of wood and polish. Somewhere in the building, a piano was playing scales, steady and careful. A woman sitting at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" He swallowed. "I was asked to come," he said quietly, holding out the card. She glanced at it and her smile grew warmer. "Ah, we've been expecting you." Those words felt strange. Expecting you. No one had expected him anywhere in a long time. She led him down the hallway. As they passed open doors, he saw different rooms. In one, a small child practiced slowly while a teacher guided their hands. In another, an older student played a complicated piece with serious focus. He listened carefully to every sound. Each piano had its own voice, its own mood. They stopped in front of a larger room at the end of the hall. Inside stood a grand piano, shining under soft lights. The man from the mall stood beside it. "You came," he said, pleased. The boy nodded. "I'm glad," the man continued. "We'd like to hear you play again, just like you did there. No pressure." The boy stepped into the room. The grand piano looked even more beautiful up close. Felt different from the mall piano. Deeper, richer, almost alive. He walked toward it slowly, as if approaching something sacred. He sat down. The room was quiet. The man and two other teachers stood nearby, not speaking. The boy placed his fingers on the keys. For a moment, memories rushed through him. The old broken piano, the mall crowd, the applause, the card in his hand. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, but full of emotion. The sound of the grand piano filled the room with warmth. It was deeper than anything he had played before. It felt like the instrument understood him. His hands moved naturally, not perfectly trained, but honest. His timing was steady. His touch was careful and expressive. The teachers exchanged quiet glances. He played a piece that carried both sadness and hope. It told the same story he had shared in the mall, but this time it felt even clearer. When he finished, the room stayed silent for a few seconds. Then one of the teachers spoke softly. "You have something special." The boy looked down at his hands. "You don't play like someone copying notes," another teacher added. "You play like someone speaking." The man from the mall nodded. "We would like to offer you full training here. Lessons, practice time, school support." The boy's heart beat faster. "You don't have to pay," the teacher continued gently. "We have a program for students with great potential. You qualify." For a moment, the boy could not speak. All those days of practicing on tables. All those nights imagining music in his head. All those hours watching others play from a distance. They had not been wasted. "I'll work hard," he said finally, his voice steady. "We know you will," the man replied. And just like that, a new chapter began. The weeks that followed were not easy. The boy woke up early each day. He attended school classes arranged by the academy. In the afternoons, he practiced for hours. Real scales, real exercises, finger drills that made his hands ache. For the first time, he learned the names of chords he had only felt before. He learned how to read complex sheet music properly. He discovered techniques he had never known existed. Sometimes he grew frustrated. Some exercises felt boring compared to the emotional pieces he loved. But he never gave up. Every time his fingers felt tired, he remembered them all. He remembered how people had looked at him differently after hearing him play. Slowly, his skill grew stronger. Months passed. The academy decided to hold a small public concert featuring its students. Parents, friends, and local music lovers were invited. The boy's name was on the program. He stood backstage wearing simple but neat clothes provided by the academy. His shoes were new. They felt strange on his feet, but he stood tall. From behind the curtain, he could see the audience filling the seats. And then he noticed something that made his chest tighten. The cafe worker from the mall sat near the front. The security guard was there too. The young man who had first joked and offered him the piano seat sat beside them, smiling proudly. They had come. When his turn arrived, he walked onto the stage. The lights were brighter than the mall lights. The hall was quieter than the shopping center ever was. He sat at the grand piano in the middle of the stage. For a brief moment, he felt the same nervousness he had felt that first day. But then he reminded himself of something simple. He was not here to impress. He was here to tell his story. He began to play. The music filled the hall beautifully. It was richer now, more polished. His training showed in the smoothness of his transitions, the strength of his technique. But the heart of his music was still the same. Honest, emotional, real. The audience listened closely. Some closed their eyes. Others watched his hands move across the keys with quiet admiration. As the melody rose toward its most powerful moment, he felt something inside him shift. He was no longer the boy who stood unnoticed near an entrance. He was no longer the boy people whispered about. He was a musician. The final notes rang out strong and clear. Silence followed. Then the applause began. It was not just loud. It was proud. He stood up and bowed slightly. As he looked out at the audience, he saw smiling faces. He saw people who had believed in him when he barely believed in himself. After the concert, many people approached him. They congratulated him. They told him how his music touched them. But the moment that meant the most was simple. The security guard stepped forward and said, "I knew that mall piano was special after you played it." The cafe worker added, "You changed more than your own life that day." The boy smiled. He understood what they meant. That one moment in the mall had done more than bring him opportunity. It had reminded people not to judge too quickly. It had reminded them that talent can hide in the quietest corners. As the night ended and he stepped outside the concert hall, he looked up at the sky. The city lights still glowed around him. But now they no longer felt distant. They felt like part of his path. He held his hands up for a second, looking at his fingers. These same hands had once played on broken keys. These same hands had practiced on empty tables. And now they had carried him to a stage. He smiled softly, all because someone had said, "Go on, just for fun." And he had been brave enough to sit down and play.